Welcome to the Dark Entry. Tonight we descend into the abyss of the unknown, where nightmares lurk and the shadows conceal secrets. From the chilling pages of NoSleep, we bring you a tale that will haunt your dreams. The Third Parent by Elias Witherow. Picture a family, their lives shattered by an unseen force, a presence that defies logic and reason. Are you brave enough to face the darkness? Well, let's find out. August 1989. My father had just arrived home from work and I was sitting at the kitchen table doing my homework. My mother was cooking dinner and Stephanie was practicing her dance for an upcoming school play. She was going to be a ballerina and had 3 weeks to learn a few simple spins and twirls. She had been diligently practicing over the past few days, but just couldn't get it right. She was young and her temper was getting the better of her. That's when Tommy decided to help her. He had been sitting on the couch watching her when suddenly he rose and stood behind my sister, placing his hands gently over her shoulders. "Let me help, sweetie," he cooed, his voice carrying a cheerful tone. My mother spun around from the stove and I saw her visibly tense. She didn't like Tommy touching us. She gripped the wooden spoon in her hand until her knuckles went white, watching as Tommy crouched and cupped Stephanie's body with his. He took her hands in his from behind and guided her arms and waist, his cheek pressing gently against my sister's. "Tommy, let her learn on her own," my mother said with voice shaking. Tommy didn't even look at her, just kept guiding my sister. I could hear my father coming down the stairs, freshly changed from a day at the office. Tommy spun my sister, and for the first time, she nailed the twirl, her little feet twisting her body in a complete circle. Tommy clapped his hands once and then leaned down and kissed Stephanie on the cheek. "Good girl." "Don't do that," my mother shrieked, dropping the spoon, her face draining of blood. I jumped in my seat at the table and swallowed hard. I didn't know why my mom was getting so upset. He was just helping her, right? I also knew deep down that it was a bad idea to yell at the new member of our family. It was the gut instinct of a child, a gentle warning that rumbled in my head. Tommy stood. My father was standing at the foot of the stairs now, frozen, unsure what to make of the confrontation. "Megan, what's wrong?" he asked. My mother's eyes never left Tommy's. "Spence, I can't do this anymore. I can't keep pretending everything is all right. We know what this monster is. We know what he did to our town all those years ago. I want him out of our house now." My father's eyes went wide, panic blooming in his face. "Megan," he licked his lips, eyes darting back and forth at all of us. "Don't be rude, Megan. Tommy has been a big help." My mom gritted her teeth. "Oh, stop that. Stop pretending we want him here. I can't watch this happen. I want him out." Very slowly, Tommy walked into the kitchen and stood right in front of my mother. He looked down at her, his perfect blue eyes shining like crystal moons. His voice was like frozen silk. "Megan, Would you come down into the basement with me? I need to have a few words with you. My mother took a step back. Get away from me! Get away from my family! You're not welcome here! She turned desperate eyes to my father. Spence, do something! My dad raised his hands in a gesture of helplessness. I could see he was terrified. Stephanie was watching from the living room, her lips quivering, eyes watering. I suddenly wanted to go comfort her, but I felt glued to my chair. Come now, Megan. Just a quick word. You. My mother spat. I gasped, heart dropping into my stomach. I had never heard my mother swear before. It scared me stiff. Suddenly, Tommy grabbed my mother by the back of the head, the smile never leaving his face, and yanked her into the basement door. Spence, stop him. Help me! My mother screamed, helplessly trying to remove Tommy's iron grip from her. Tommy shot my dad a look that froze him where he stood. Sorry, Megan. We need to do what he says. And then he was crying. Stephanie was now openly crying, hands at her sides, tears running down her face. I felt sick as I watched Tommy open the basement door and drag my mother down into the darkness. The door slammed, closed behind him. It was silent for a few minutes. And then the screams began. I had never heard my mother scream before, and the sound of it shattered me. My father ran into the kitchen, scooped me up into his arms, and snatched up Stephanie into the other one. He marched us upstairs into his bedrooms and dumped us on the bed. We sat huddled like that for hours, none of us speaking a word. My mother continued to scream. Finally, long after the sun set, we heard the basement door open. Mom's sleeping in the basement tonight, Tommy called out. March 1991. 2 years passed after that night. My mother never resisted or talked back to Tommy again. When she came out of the basement the following morning, I expected to see her covered in bruises and blood, but I could see no visible signs of violence. I was too young to understand what had happened, why my mother now walked with a limp and would so for the rest of her life. She didn't speak to my father for a month, and even then, it was just enough to get by. I noticed my father crying a lot during those 2 years. I didn't know what was happening to my family, but I kept my mouth shut and obeyed the rules. Listen to Tommy, don't talk about Tommy to others. Things went calm during those 2 years. Tommy continued to give us life lessons and be a part of our home. No one but my family knew he was living with us. He was our secret, the dark star that hung above our heads. I learned to smile around Tommy, as did my sister. If he thought we were happy, he seemed more relaxed. But that night, my mother challenged him. That changed something. Every couple of months, Tommy would assert his authority over my parents. He would test them, stretch the limits of their patience and nerves. Most of the time, my father and mother would humbly submit to whatever mind game he played with them. Most of the time, he would do or say something to Stephanie or myself. It always made me uncomfortable. Sometimes he would have us sit on his lap while he stroked her hair. Sometimes he'd sing strange songs to my sister about love. Sometimes he would make us take a bath together while he watched. I always put on a brave face during these times. Stephanie was young still, so she wasn't as bothered as I was. It was uncomfortable, and I would look to my parents for guidance. With pale faces, they nodded silently, and I continued in whatever activity they were forced into doing. It was in the early part of 1991 when the next awful thing happened to my family. Tommy pushed the limits once again. I rubbed sleep from my eyes and looked at my race car clock on the wall. The glow in the dark hands read 2 a.m. I could hear something in the hallway outside my room. It sounded like someone crying. Where was Tommy? I checked all the corners of my room to make sure he wasn't there watching me sleep. When I was assured he wasn't, I pulled the covers away and slipped to the floor. I crept to my door and looked out into the darkness. I could see a figure sitting on the floor by my sister's closed door. A person. I squinted in the black and I realized it was my father with his hands over his face. He was sobbing, his back against the wall. "Dad?" I whispered. My father looked up and immediately shooed me back into my room. I just stood there as my eyes adjusted to the night. My father's face was a mess of blood and bruises. "Go back to bed, Matt. Please." I took a hesitant step out into the hallway. "Dad, what happened to your face? What's going on? Did Tommy do that?" My father's eyes went wide and he shushed me. No. Of course not. Don't say such things. Tommy, he's here to help us. Be a better family. I walked closer to my dad and froze as I passed my sister's door. I could hear muffled cries from inside. I could hear fear. "Dad," I whispered, pointing to the door. "What's wrong with Steph?" My father wiped a trail of blood from his lips, eyes watering, anguish stretching his features. "Come here, Matt." I crawled into his outstretched arms as something loud banged against the wall from my sister's room. I jumped and my father curled me up into his chest. I could feel tears drip onto my head as he fought back misery. "Tommy's in there, isn't he?" I said quietly. My dad sniffled. "Yes, son." I looked up into his bloody face. "What did you do, Dad?" My dad tried to smile, but his face wouldn't cooperate. He wanted to do something with your sister I didn't like. I told him no. As he spoke, I realized I could hear my mother crying from the bedroom. My dad cupped his hands under my chin. "You can't say no to Tommy, okay? Remember that." My sister screamed from her bedroom, a shrill, piercing cry that shook me to my soul. I gripped my father's arm. "Why is he here?" I whispered. "Why can't he just go away?" My father was silent a moment, and then he lowered his mouth to my ear. "Listen to me, Matt. This is very important. When you grow up, do not have children. He follows those with children." I shifted in my father's arms as something was dragged across the hardwood floor from the other side of the wall. My father gritted his teeth. more tears spilling. We don't know who he is or what he is. He came to our town when we were little boys and girls, just like you and Stephanie. Your mother and I lived 2 houses down from one another. Tommy infested our street. I don't know how. He was everywhere, always. He'd be at my house, but also across the street, and also at your mother's, and all at the same time. I don't know what he wants, what his purpose is. He just showed up one day. He just showed up and wouldn't go away. God knows my father tried. Is that how Grandpa died? I asked. I never met my grandpa. I just knew he had died years before I was born. My father nodded. Yes, Matt. Tommy had to teach him a lesson. He had to teach the entire street a lesson. After that, why can't you just kill him? I whispered ever so softly. My dad brought his mouth closer to my ear, his voice barely audible. We tried everything. We burned him, shot him, cut him into pieces, but it never worked. He always came back, knocking at our door, and someone had to pay. Someone always had to pay. If we didn't follow these rules, someone had to pay. Tommy was our secret. He was our invisible monster, hidden from the outside world. Deaths were covered up. Abuse was brushed under the rug. Because we knew if anyone said a word, Tommy would make it bad for whoever had to face his punishment. I digested all of this with the understanding of an 8-year-old, and the only thing I could think to say was, when is he going away? My father kissed the top of my head. 3 more years. The bedroom door suddenly opened, and my father jumped, stumbling me out of his arms. Tommy stood in the darkness, his face perfectly composed, except he was breathing hard. His plastic-looking face scared me, his 2 blue eyes glowing out of the black. Tommy jabbed a thumb over his shoulder at the now silent bedroom. She's gonna sleep like a log tonight. I want to thank you for joining me tonight, and if you've enjoyed this tale, make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to The Dark Entry for more terrifying tales. Also, hit that notification bell to stay up to date on all our chilling content. As well as doing that, please go over to their Reddit channel, Elias Witherow, and give that author some love, as they deserve so much, as their writing skills are beyond measure. And if you'd like to support my work, get access to even more terrifying content, including not safe for work stories, consider joining my Patreon. Add a smile on your mind. Your support helps me bring you these haunting tales. Thank you again, and good night, and sleep tight.